Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I wanted to cover my take on the whole damage counter movement strategy for Ruby Amethyst. It does seem that this is the way the ink might want to be played after rotation, and it is still pretty powerful. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what we get post-rotation, but in this demo and at around the 230 mark, we're going to go over the deck profile. You're going to see just how powerful this deck is. So you aim to have a pretty decent sized board. You have well statted characters in Ruby Amethyst. Aim for the higher willpower characters. And once you have this setup going, you're going to utilize a bunch of different tools. Some of them are the new cards in Reign of Jafar. And what you're going to see here is using this Everybody's Got a Weakness to clear 4 damage points off of each of my characters, one each for a total of 4. Take out the readied up Smee and draw 4 cards in the process. Look at the massive swing that this card had enabled me to do. I can self-damage my things with things like Teeth and Ambitions, obviously challenging by forcefully tapping down with Elsa, and we'll talk a little bit about the deck list and some of the choices that we make here, but you can see the overwhelming card advantage that we're able to generate. And this deck, if it's one thing I will say, into other mid-range and tempo oriented decks and into aggro decks, this damage counter deck looks to be like very, very powerful. Where I could see it struggling is into control decks, right? If think about DKP's Shark list, where they don't play a lot of characters, you don't really have anything to move damage counters to. So maybe you want to have a backup aggression strategy to deal with those kind of decks. And then of course, Ruby Amethyst does struggle into discard. But that being said, you do have tools to deal with the warded characters, obviously being Ruby deck in Be Prepared, and you may be able to draw through a lot of your deck, because if you're building the deck like I have it constructed, which again we'll go over in just a moment here, you will be playing things like Finders Keepers, you will be playing things obviously like Everybody's Got a Weakness, the new Hades, which has shown to have tournament success at a high level, right? If you watch my meta deck profile, or sorry, meta review profile from the second week in June, or second weekend in June, we did see a tournament where 2 Ruby Amethyst decks making top 16 and 1 making top 8 with the new Hades, which was really, really nice to see. So yeah, this match is pretty much wrapped up. You can see here we've got total control of the match, a ton of cards in hand, even more cards on board. And even if we get board wiped or something like that, or a board is being dealt with, we have just like, I don't want to say infinite threats, but more or less, right? Like enough threats to continue to deploy onto the board here to have significant impact. So let's go ahead and take a look at the deck profile, and we'll explain some of the choices and how the deck is constructed. Alright, so this is the way that I've opted to build the deck. The nice thing about this deck too is, one of the key things for success, it seems, moving forward, at least for me, is very low uninkable counts. Now, I did not take this deck online and test it in ladder. I've just been testing some quick sims, and I can tell that, playing into aggro, playing into other tempo-oriented decks, mid-range decks, the deck feels very, very strong. And I can tell playing into control decks, like you can still win, but it's obviously a lot harder for the reasons I mentioned during that quick simulation demo. But we're going to go over some of the character choices, and yeah, the lower uninkable ink count that you play, the better the deck felt. And so this was the list that I ended up landing on. I went back to the OG, the Olafs and the Minnie Mouse, since you do want to synergize as much as possible with Teeth and Ambitions, with the new Madame Medusa, the Hades, etc. I found that the 1/3s were very good. Also, they feel really good to bounce still with the Madame M Fox, and then replay if needed. And then of course they're just ink otherwise. But just being a 1/3 body that puts pressure on to quest for 2, it's kind of awkward for your opponent to out sometimes, so they'll just leave it on the board and let it quest, and then you can do really cool things like obviously Crab boost it, Mother Goth will boost it, and then move the damage counters, which again we'll go over how in just a moment. For the 2 slot, basically your main 2 drops are the Queen of Hearts and the Vanellope. Your Mother Gothel here, which is one of the new cards, is more of a utility option. This card is good, but you really need to know how and when to play her. In simulations, you're not really going to be able to utilize her all too well. You have to test it in real matches. So I will say, I didn't really get too much good use out of this card, because this is a strategic card that you really want to play to help break through a board, if that makes sense. Like, you being able to play this, dealing the 2 damage, maybe proccing something like your Queen of Hearts, taking out an aggro threat that your opponent didn't expect, and then your Queen of Hearts may, let's say trade into a Smee, then you get your Queen of Hearts back, so you get an ink resource. You took out the Mr. Smee while proccing the Queen ability, which just comes out of nowhere and totally devastates your opponent, right? So those are the kind of interactions that you maybe want to set up with this. Because this is a 2-cost card, you don't want to usually play this on 2, which is why you're playing kind of a standard standard 2-drop package. It's only 7, so not the full 8. But, you know, you could play the Mother Gothel and just choose not to use the ability. You could use it and just put damage on Minnie Mouse to, again, just get these things ready to move damage counters, etc. But generally, you want to keep these in reserve. And I think you only need 2. I don't think you want more than that. As you can see with this deck, you do potentially draw through a good portion of your deck, so you will see this at some point most likely, and even if you don't see it, it's not a make or break. But yeah, this is more of a strategic, like, board breaker-esque kind of card, if that makes sense. I mean, I guess I wouldn't call it a board breaker, but like, it's a card that can facilitate a tempo swing for you, because you get a resource back, right? You facilitate the damage counters, which can proc certain abilities like the Queen of Hearts, that kind of thing. So it's a decent card, and I think you do want to play it. But again, you could opt to say, no, I'm just going to go for Vanellope and more Madame Medusa or something if you just want more ink ability and just more direct, like, impact that you don't have to kind of set up for, because obviously this Mother Gothel requires setup. Queen of Hearts, no brainer, right? You put damage on it with any of your multitude of cards that can put damage on it, and it becomes a 4/4 on 2, which is insane. Vanellope, I will say, you know, just as an evasive threat, she's decent. She can be pumped up with the crab. You obviously can't use the Mother Gothel on her because she'd just get KO'd because she can't take 2 damage. But, you know, just being that evasive character that can quest and also challenge other evasives is nice. What I did notice is, you know, you can just move damage counters to Diablo and stuff. So, like, you don't really need the evasive threats to take out the other evasive threats if you can just move damage counters, because evasive cards are usually generally weak, right? So moving 2 to 3 damage counters will usually just out them anyways. Madame M. Fox, of course, just more ability to control the board state and bounce back some of your, like, key cards. Like, there's a lot here that you can bounce back: Madame Medusa, Merlin Crab, Panic to remove damage counters, Belle to remove damage counters, Elsa for retap down, Maui to reset damage if you've already moved damage counters and you need to reset him, that kind of deal. And of course, just being a fantastic card in general, contesting boards, taking out Daisy Ducks, those kinds of things, very, very strong. Only 2 Madame Medusa. Again, you could opt to play more, but the real strength of this card is on the play, I think. I've already discussed this before. And so for that reason, I've opted to only include 2, because the main thing I want to do with this deck and why I think it could be good moving forward is this is a deck that has a lot of different ways to swing tempo back in your favor. And when I build decks, as you've probably noticed, again, coming from that school of Yu-Gi-Oh, where going first, you should auto win every match, right? Now, obviously that doesn't happen, but like, going first, you have an overwhelmingly positive chance to win your match, right? If you know how to play, if you and your opponent are on equal skill level, your deck building is on point, you should be winning the majority of your matches going first. Where you need help is you need to play as many cards as possible without compromising, you know, your deck or your key lines of play to win going second. And this card just really doesn't do that. I mean, in certain scenarios it can, but that's the reason there's only 2 of this card in the deck. And the reason I say that is because, you know, by the time you're gonna play this card, it's gonna be on turn 3, and by turn 3, your opponent has already developed their 3-drop card. Whereas if you're on the play, right, you go for turn 3 first. So, you know, you play your turn 2 play, your opponent plays their turn 2 play, they pass back to you. Now on turn 3, you can be like, I'm gonna slow you down even more. Madame Medusa, bounce your turn 2 play back to your hand. That tempo swing just, like, is so huge, especially into certain matchups, that it could potentially win you the game on turn 3. But you don't really need that, because going on the play, like, you already have enough. So, you know, this card is still good, and even into mid and late game it can be good, but more often than not you draw and you're like, it's just a 3/3/3 that doesn't I don't really want to proc the ability for, or, you know, I'm just not going to use it. Of course, you can still proc the ability and put damage on stuff, but, you know, you want cards that are actually good for utility. And so for that reason, you're also on 4 crabs. I've already explained this many, many times. Crab is one of the best cards in the format right now. Yeah, you want to play 4. And the critical mass of 3-drop cards, again, synergizes because, hey, you want to be singing Friends. And the extra couple of 2-drops is nice too, because you can technically sing Teeth and Ambitions. Mother Gothel being a 1/3, which we didn't really talk about, also is a card that can take a multitude of these, you know, deal 2 damage to it. Teeth and Ambitions, Hades, Mother Gothel, that kind of thing, and survive that interaction. Moving on, I opted for 2 Panic. I was going for 4 Bell, but I was running into a problem deck building where I wasn't running enough 4-drops, or any 4-drops really. I didn't want to put in Genie. I didn't want to put in Rabbits, although you can make a case to do those things. I opted for the Panic. This is a 2-quester, 2/3 that moves 2 damage counters, which could kind of work if you get the Medusa line. And this is an argument to say, even if you're on the draw, you want to play more Medusa, because you can play more Panic and just, like, naturally move into this line and say, well, Quantum, I can put 2 damage on something and maybe not bounce a card, or don't get as much value bouncing the 2-drop or 1-drop card off the Madame Medusa, but then I set up for my panic play on the follow-up where I can drop panic, move the 2 damage counters, and out, the turn 3 threat or something like that, right? There's always that kind of consideration. So you could build the deck and mess around with the ratios a little bit more. Like technically, not that I would, but you can cut the Mother Gothels, put 1 extra Medusa, 1 extra panic, right? Maybe go to 61, put in a 4th Vanellope, so you have that constant mid-range curve out of like 4 or 8 1-drops, 8 2-drops, etc. And then the other 4-drop card I opted for here was Moana, just because, again, this card is evasive, it can challenge and gets a nice little boost to something else, but with no Peter Pan Shadow Finder in the deck or anything, you can definitely opt to cut this card. One of the things that I did notice with this is if we go back here and we go to the edit deck screen just for a quick second, you look at the 4-drop slot. Again, there's always huge competition here, but when you're not going for the standard route of rabbits and or goats and or genies, what do you want to do? Do you want to put in goats in this slot? You definitely could. Is there anything else worth putting in? I don't think you want to put in the Shadow Catcher because, again, it's uninkable and you're not necessarily inking every turn, although you definitely could depending on the matchup. Again, you saw how many cards we drew once we got our setup going. Dolores is always interesting because, as a 2-quester 3/3, she can take the 2 damage. She's also a 2-quester and she replaces herself. I think this is like one of the most underrated cards right now for Amethyst. Like, it's, in my opinion and limited testing, it does seem pretty good. Super Goof is a really good option as well in the 4 slot, coming in with Rush and being able to take damage right away, but also gaining you 2 lore in the process and potentially outing a threat. So there's a couple of different considerations instead of the Moana. I don't think you want to play this Genie, although this Genie does have some utility because it's a 5. So you play it, you're not going to get the ability to draw 3 right away. And if it survives, you can put 2 damage on it the following turn, then quest with it, put it back into your deck, right? So you have a big body to put damage on, even though this is uninkable, so keep that in mind. I don't think you play Magicka Dispel or anything like that, but you can see that there's a couple of good options. The Magicka Dispel that makes you not able to discard, which is usually pretty good, but discard decks can definitely still deal with it with Muses and just steal songs. This Elsa, I've been really coming around on this card. Just another way to force exert, and this is not once per turn. So if you have a couple ink available and you have a decent sized board with these overstated like Mim Foxes, Queen, that's a 4/4, that kind of thing, you can just be like discard 2 cards, pay 2 ink, exert your characters, and then crash into them, put more damage on your stuff, right, through challenging. So I would think that 1 or 2 of this Elsa could be a really cool option, as you also have the 5th Spirit, but I was testing this in Red Purple as a 1 of, in Blurple as a 1 and even 2 of, because I was testing out an Anna build, which will probably come later. That deck is actually kind of fun. It may actually be decent. Like it has some play into meta decks, believe it or not. But yeah, this card I think is very interesting and worth looking at. It may not be super relevant or super competitive because, again, in certain situations where your hand's getting discarded, you just don't have the resources, you don't have the ink to spare for like the tempo loss to exert. It may not be worth it, and it may just be a dead card, but it's inkable and it's still a 3/4 body that quests for 1. And to use the ability doesn't mean that you have to exert this card. So you could actually use this ability, pay the 1 ink, and then use the Elsa herself to challenge, right? So there's a couple of cool interactions that you could do with this, obviously. And then, just in general, if you have any abilities that proc on challenge, this card can help facilitate those as well. So there are a couple of options, but again, I just put in Moana as a generic filler, but I think that's one of the areas that this deck list could improve upon. And again, like I said, I was just putting this in there really to fill out the 4 cost section, because you could literally build this deck with no 4 drop cards. If you were going to go like rabbits and stuff, and do you really want to put in snakes? I mean, you could, right? You could go back to literally set 2, right? The 1/3 1 drops into snakes and foxes and stuff. But because your aim is to develop a decent sized board, like Mim Foxing back a 1-drop to replay the 1-drop is actually not that bad. You don't want to be bouncing too many things off, because as you can tell from the simulation match, you want to build up a wider board so that when you eventually proc the everybody's got a weakness, this card is even better than Finders Keepers, like by a mile. Like, not normally, but like in this kind of deck, it can be, right? You saw move 4 damage counters, heal up my guys, but also draw 4 and take out a threat on your end. This card is cracked, right? When it's used properly. If anything, you should be playing like 3. So you can argue like cut the Finders Keepers. I mean, but Finders Keepers is just generically okay. Like if you don't have a setup going, if you're suffering for board state and this card is just dead in that case, like that's the trade-off. So while it's, really high risk, high reward, it is just that. It's potentially high risk if you don't get a good setup going. So that's where I think the Finders Keepers as contingency is nice, because you can like ink this one, play the Finders Keepers, or vice versa, depending on the kind of setup that you have. So having those versatile options is nice, and that also contributes to your 4 and 5 cost curve out. Because there are sometimes, you have 1, 2, and 3 costed cards on board, and they're all damaged, and then you're just like, I'm just gonna on turn 4 not even play a character. I'm just gonna weakness, take out your threat, move 3 damage counters, and then draw 3 cards. Like, that's crazy, right? If you get that kind of situation off. And so again, for that reason, you can argue to play a better 2-drop than Vanellope that can't take damage. But again, you're just trying to cover for the metagame. Moving on to the 5-drops, I know it's crazy to think 2 belt. I was testing 4, but like, it's just too expensive. And I'm moving damage counters in other ways. Like, honestly, the panic moving 2 and the everybody's got a weakness is the way that I would prefer to move damage. The bell being able to move the extra point of damage, not shifting. This quest for 2, just like the pain, this is a 4/4 body. Pain is only a 2/3, so it's much more susceptible to being removed, and it can't challenge as well. But it's decent enough. Like, honestly, on 5, I'd much rather play Elsa or Maui, because these cards are things that have rush and they can take damage right away. Elsa in particular can force a tap down, so you're just proccing more damage onto your stuff, which again just makes the everybody's got a weakness stronger. They're big bodies too, like all of these are technically, but the 5 willpower on these, the extra 1 willpower plus the ability to challenge right away, means that they curve out into the Hades nicely as well. Hopefully you can drop Hades. If you don't have something else that can take damage, these guys can likely take the damage. You draw 2, and then of course no 6-drop, but that leads into the Hades here. Again, proving that it does have some tournament viability, especially if people come off discard a little bit because they're trying to combat the aggro decks, and then you see a rise in tempo on aggro decks because those decks can dump their hands faster, whereas discard can't get as much value. Then you're into that kind of aggressive meta, and that's where a deck like this can really thrive, right? Like, again, you can overcome the discard matchup. Ruby Amethyst can always overcome the discard matchup if they don't get a perfect curve, and you just get a little bit of luck by drawing your Be Prepared at the right time, and you have enough ink to play it and like out their board, and they haven't run away with the game. But in general, like, when Prince John gets out of the format, like, discard is not going to be a problem anymore. So like, prepping the practice and getting ready for like, what is Ruby Amethyst going to look like? Because Ruby Amethyst is still going to be a control deck. It's probably going to be one of the top control decks still. Like, a lot, like not a lot, but like we still get a lot of decent tools. Like, I know the MIM and stuff packages rotate out and they probably don't get reprinted, but you're getting new cards for this deck that actually work fairly nicely. So it'll be interesting. Song wise, I did offer the 3B prep, so you can see your uninkable count, while it is only 8, it is very expensive, 8 cost cards, but you hopefully draw through enough with this deck that you will be able to not brick on the high cost cards. And when you do see the high cost cards, or if you see them a little bit early, you can get to the point where you can play them out, because again, you're very aggressive in your game plan to take out threats. The Teeth and Ambitions, really good, obviously into aggro and into maintaining tempo, because you can sing it. It is a song, so it means it does get ripped by Ursula Deceiver, which is unfortunate, but I just found it to be more useful in Brawl in a lot of situations. So especially because, again, it puts the damage on stuff. I can sing this, put damage on something, and then get extra value off of the everybody's got a weakness right away, for example. Like, just getting that damage on the extra character, getting an extra draw 1, taking a damage off, so the 2 damage becomes a 1 point of damage. It's really, really strong. 4 friends, again, you play a critical mass of 3 drops, and then again, 3 Be Prepared. So, experiment with the deck. It is really cool. Don't go like, all out with the damage stuff, because again, these cards are technically like unplayable if you don't have another character. So you do need to maintain board state. You do need to find that balance. But when you do start proccing their abilities and get the setup going, like, the deck is extremely strong. And like I said, if you're in a mid-range and aggro meta, this is a deck that actually has competitive viability. Like, it is actually quite powerful. So yeah, give it a run. Let me know what you like, what you dislike with it, what you want to test. And again, you can see the power of what this deck can do in the sim. And the other thing before I wrap up, this deck gets around resist, right? And the big threat in the format right now does seem to be Rhino, and this card just cooks Rhino like one shot, because it moves the damage counter, so it doesn't deal damage, which the resist would prevent. Like, resist 1 prevents 1 damage, resist 2 prevents 2 damage. You're moving a damage counter, so you're not dealing damage, you're moving a damage that's already existing onto that character, and so it bypasses the resist ability. If you were wondering why a deck like this, is a little bit better than it would seem, because Rhino obviously is everywhere. Amber Steel Song and Amber Steel Aggro, which are 2 very popular decks right now, and this deck can just overcome that Rhino package. Your opponent invests a decent amount to play the Rhino, right? They're 1 drop, they're 2 drop on the shift, and then 2 cards to play that Rhino, right? And they're only questing for 2 out of it, and if you can just like instantly make it vulnerable, that's insane, right? Like you like it's you out that Rhino before they get like 2 to 3 quests off with it, and that's again a potential game-winning play for you on turn 2, turn 3, depending on the play draw when you're able to deal with the Rhino, right, or set up some form of damage counter movement, which I guess technically wouldn't be until turn 4, but again, you can very easily like just finesse the board state that you can shut down a lot of what the opponent is developing in a readied state with the movement of the damage counters. And this is actually something that I've talked about many times in the past, where I said we need better ways to deal with readied characters. And as you saw in that sim match, the moving of the damage counters is a perfect way to do that. You just got to be able to build the deck in the right way. So all right, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Again, you can definitely go with more like Panic and Bells, change around the ratios, test different things. But this list, again, in Sims, not in actual application, well, yawning there, was actually pretty good. So, all right, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you again for watching, guys. Quantum is out.